Hi, I'm Pastor Steve Talmage with Love of Christ Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. Each week, Pastor Nanette Christofferson and I seek to provide a brief introduction to two of the assigned Sunday Bible readings. In this video, we'll look at Luke chapter 13, verses 1 to 9, and that's the assigned gospel reading for Sunday, March 20th, 2022. We have two sections in our reading here. The verses 1 to 5 deal with an exchange that Jesus has with a group of people. We don't know exactly who this is. Is it disciples? Is it larger than that? But we have questions being raised to Jesus about some recent news headlines or news events that have circulated around. And the recent events are there's reports of Pilate or his Roman soldiers killing Galileans and then taking their blood and mixing it into their ritual sacrifices. We don't know where this took place. We don't know if it was in Jerusalem or up in Galilee. But what we do know is that some Galileans were killed by Pilate's orders. And then their blood was put into some form of whether Jewish ritual sacrifices or Roman, we don't know for sure. The second is a report of an accident of a tower collapsing and killing 18 people. Tragedy, horrible. And we see the question being asked, who were worse sinners, Were these worse sinners than other people that they died such tragic deaths? And Jesus deflects. He makes it very clear that we're not going to go down that path. But it's so normal because each of us, every one of us, when we've experienced suffering in our relationships with our family and loved ones, in the world, we're always asking, why did this happen? What could be done to prevent it? How on earth, are we going to make it through all this? Suffering raises questions. No question about that. People always want an answer to what appears to be unjust or unanswered suffering. We're raising lots of questions about Russia and Ukraine and the horrors that we're reading and hearing and seeing. Jewish teaching tried to provide answers, often to which there aren't answers. There's Old Testament references that we suffer the consequences of our ancestors' sins. We suffer because God is trying to teach us a lesson and shape us into the people He wants us to be. Or we have done some horrible things, and therefore we are going to suffer consequences because of that. Jesus answers both of these with the same answer. No, I tell you they weren't worse sinners, but unless you repent, which means change your mind or the direction you're traveling or the orientation that you have, you will perish as they did. Jesus uses these unpredictable, unchangeable incidences to prompt His audience to change what they can, which is their minds, and how they approach the question of suffering, how they deal with unjust and unexpected suffering. So let's not focus on the unforeseen tragedy of others at the expense of how we can live our lives knowing empires do harm. Again, Vladimir Putin. And accidents happen. We shift to the next part of our pericope or our lesson, and that's the parable of the barren fig tree. A parable is always an earthly story, meaning it comes out of ordinary life where people can picture in their mind or see as Jesus tells the story things that make a connection to this story. But there's always one spiritual truth contained in that parable. So we have this fig tree that is barren. First, the fig tree is in a vineyard. And so in Jewish thinking, as they read and listen to their stories out of the scriptures, the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures, both the vineyard and the fig tree are symbols of Israel, of God's chosen people. Also, it would not be unusual to have a fig tree in a vineyard, because soil, irrigated soil, fertile soil, is hard to come by in the Middle East. And so wherever you could plant a tree that bears fruit, you would do that. And a vineyard would have access to good soil. A vineyard would have access to some water. William Barclay tries to address this dilemma. First, he says the fig tree had a favored status. It got planted in a vineyard, and it had 3 years to be nurtured and watered and fed and looked after. But it didn't produce any fruit, which leads him to a second statement that uselessness invites disaster. And then a third point is nothing which only takes out can survive. So a possible takeaway from this little parable that Jesus tells is that we can look at our lives and look at people we know and look at ourselves. And Barclay says there are 2 kinds of people in the world: those who take out more than they put in, and those who put in more than they take out. You can imagine the preference that Jesus would have, or the vineyard owner and fig tree owner would want, and even the gardener would want. You know, you want to grow things that produce, that bear fruit, rather than just take up time, resources, and don't produce anything. We have at the end of this a gospel of second chances. There's good news in this little parable, because a fig tree normally takes 3 years to mature, and after 3 years fruit should be born. And if it isn't being born, then it's likely that tree will never bear fruit. It's a barren tree. So the farmer would be expected to chop it down and start with a new one. But here we have a gardener, a worker with the farmer, who says, just give me 1 more year. We get an extension of mercy and an opportunity to give this tree just a little bit extra time, a little more water, a little more fertilizer, a little more time. And isn't that what Jesus is all about? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. We do believe in a God of grace, a God of mercy, but a God who also extends that grace and pours out that mercy, so that the life that you and I have been given as a gift can bear fruit. The invitation of this reading is to keep our focus on the right things. There's a call to repent, which let's change what we can, and that's our mind, our perspective, our orientation, our attitudes, the direction we maybe are traveling our life, and turn in the direction of God. And the God that we're turning towards is a God of grace and mercy. And it's an invitation with that parable that we look at the life that we have been granted, that we have been given, and to use it to bear fruit that is tasty, that is good, that people want to enjoy, that provides and sustains life and joy and sustenance. And then there's an invitation here to keep the focus on how we are bearing fruit in and through our life, rather than trying to figure out who might be a worse sinner than others, who's getting what they deserve, rather than focus on, let's not worry about others, let's think about ourselves. And also we have a little lesson here about the potential of being impatient and not extending grace like this gardener pled for to this tree, to the very people around us. Let's let the people around us who we sometimes want to write off or give up on or just, make judgments upon, let's extend the same kind of grace that God extends to us. I hope you'll reflect on this lesson, that you'll prepare your hearts for this coming Sunday, and this is helpful to you on your Lenten journey, as we are all called to repent and walk in the footsteps of Jesus and try to see things the way Jesus sees them. God bless you. Take care.